I am Naomi, 40 years old, and until last night I thought my marriage was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared struggle. But at our 15th anniversary dinner, my husband boldly announced his affair and demanded our house. While our kids sat completely stunned, I calmly pulled a folder from my bag. Speaking of honesty, I smiled, sliding over a contract he signed 15 years ago. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had a partner underestimate your intelligence. The atmosphere inside Le Petit Chateau was suffocatingly elegant. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over our table, where my son Malik, who is 14, and my daughter Tiana, who is 12, were busy taking pictures of their extravagant desserts. It was supposed to be a celebration of 15 years of marriage. Instead, it became the graveyard of my patience. Marcus, my husband of a decade and a half, stood up and tapped his spoon against his champagne flute. The gentle clinking sound caught the attention of the nearby tables. I smiled, expecting a toast about how far we had come since our broke college days. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored Tom Ford suit, a suit I had bought for him, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He did not hand it to me gently. He dropped it onto the center of the table right next to the floral centerpiece. The heavy thud made Tiana jump. "I am filing for divorce, Naomi," he announced, his voice steady and devoid of any warmth. The words hung in the air like a foul odor. I stared at the envelope, then up at the man I had built a life with. His jaw was set tight and his eyes held a cruel, arrogant gleam. "I need a woman who understands my ambition," he continued, projecting his voice so the neighboring tables could clearly hear. "I am the CEO of a multi-million-dollar financial consulting firm, and I need a partner who can match my energy. Not someone who has been a stay-at-home leech for the past 15 years. Malik dropped his phone onto the table, his eyes wide with shock. "Dad, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice cracking. Before Marcus could answer, the scent of overpowering vanilla perfume assaulted my nose. I did not even have to turn around to know who it was. Chloe. Marcus had an assistant named Chloe, who was 26 years old and wore designer labels she could not possibly afford on her salary. She strutted over from the restaurant bar, swaying her hips in a tight red dress, and stood right beside Marcus. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Chloe is the future," Marcus said, looking down at me as if I were something he had scraped off his shoe. "She has been my rock for the past year. We are in love, and we are not hiding it anymore." Tiana let out a small sob, covering her mouth with her hands. My heart broke for my children, but I refused to let Marcus see me crumble. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Yes," Marcus snapped, irritated that I was not crying or causing a scene. "And let us get business out of the way right now. I am keeping the $2 million house in the suburbs. You can pack your things and move out by the end of the weekend. Do not worry, I will not leave you destitute. I am willing to offer you $2,000 a month in alimony. That should be enough for you to rent a decent apartment if you budget carefully. After all, you have not worked a real job in 15 years, so you should be used to living modestly." He smirked, and Chloe actually let out a tiny, triumphant giggle. They stood there waiting for me to explode. They wanted me to scream and throw my drink so Marcus could play the victim of a crazy, bitter wife. But I did not give them the satisfaction. I looked at the divorce papers on the table and then looked back at Marcus. His entire financial consulting firm, his luxury cars, his expensive suits, it was all built on a foundation he had completely forgotten about. I reached down into my designer tote bag. My fingers found the folder. I gently placed it right on top of his paperwork. "You see, Marcus?" I smiled warmly, reaching for my glass again. "The company you claim to own is actually mine." Marcus stared at me for a split second before bursting into loud, theatrical laughter. He threw his head back, and the sound echoed across the quiet dining room. Chloe joined in her high-pitched giggle, grating against my ears. Malik and Tiana looked at me with a mixture of absolute confusion and tiny slivers of hope. Marcus reached confidently across the white tablecloth and picked up the yellowed document, holding it up to the expensive chandelier light, as if it were nothing but a silly little child drawing. "Are you seriously bringing this out right now?" he asked, wiping a completely fake tear from his right eye. "This is a 15-year-old piece of paper, Naomi. We signed this in our tiny apartment back when we could barely afford basic groceries. You gave me $50,000 from your grandmother inheritance. I appreciate the little seed money, I really do, but my financial firm is now valued at $20 million. A dusty old startup agreement means absolutely nothing in the real corporate business world." He tossed the paper back onto the table with a highly dismissive flick of his wrist. Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, and gave me a terribly condescending pout. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "This is actually quite embarrassing for you. I took a few semesters of corporate law before I became his assistant. A simple venture capital agreement does not hold up against a fully structured liability company. You have been entirely out of the professional workforce for way too long. Maybe you should just stick to baking chocolate chip cookies for the local school parents instead of trying to play lawyer with the big boys." I did not blink. I let her finish her little arrogant speech, and then I turned my attention right back to my husband. The man who thought he was a massive titan of industry, but had completely forgotten the essential fine print that built his entire throne. "It is perfectly true that I have been baking cookies," I said, my voice perfectly leveled. "But between morning school drop-offs and afternoon soccer practices, I have also been having strict quarterly meetings with our dedicated corporate legal team. If you actually bothered to read the physical document, Marcus, you would clearly see it is not just a venture capital agreement. It is a legally binding nominee director agreement." Marcus abruptly stopped smiling. His brow furrowed deeply as he looked down at the paper again, but he did not pick it up this time. 15 years ago, when your very first business went completely bankrupt and you had a terrible credit score, no reputable bank would give you a loan. I continued, making sure every single word was crystal clear. "I formed the holding company, I put in the initial capital, and I appointed you as the nominee director to run the day-to-day corporate operations. On paper, you are the public face of the company. But in harsh reality, you are just a glorified employee. I currently own 80% of the voting shares. That is absolutely impossible." Marcus snapped, his voice completely losing its former confident edge. "I built this massive firm from the ground up. My personal name is on the commercial lease. My name is on the main operating agreement. Your name is on the operating agreement as a simple managing member acting strictly on behalf of my private blind trust." I corrected him immediately. "A trust you eagerly agreed to because you were desperate and drowning in terrible personal debt. And since you were so busy being the big boss and sleeping around with your young assistant, you never actually bothered to properly review the updated corporate legal filings." Chloe defensively crossed her arms, her previously smug expression severely faltering. "He is bluffing, Marcus," she whispered loudly to him. "She is just a sad stay-at-home wife." "I am the primary shareholder of your entire life, Marcus," I said, leaning forward slightly. "And if you turn carefully to page 7, you will easily find the morality and fiduciary clause. Do you remember what that means?" Marcus stared at me, his face slowly draining of all its natural color. I could see the exact moment his delayed memory finally caught up with his massive arrogance. "Let me quickly refresh your memory," I said cheerfully. "The strict clause clearly states that if the appointed director engages in any public conduct that brings shame, disgrace, or moral scandal to the company or its primary shareholder, their equity can be forcibly recalled. By standing up in this restaurant, announcing your infidelity, and attempting to humiliate me, you just triggered the clause and lost absolutely everything you have, Marcus." Marcus stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The arrogant smirk that had been permanently plastered on his face just moments ago completely dissolved into a mask of pure panic. He looked desperately at the paperwork on the table and then back at me, hoping to see some sign that I was bluffing. But I was not bluffing. Chloe shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other, clearly sensing the sudden and drastic shift in the power dynamic. She tugged at Marcus' sleeve, whispering urgently for him to say something to put me back in my place. But Marcus was absolutely speechless. I did not wait for him to find his voice. I gracefully raised my hand and gently signaled the waiter who had been awkwardly hovering a few feet away, trying not to eavesdrop on our spectacular public implosion. The young waiter hurried over carrying the leather booklet that held our bill. The total for our anniversary dinner was exactly $1,500. It included the imported Wagyu beef, the rare vintage wine Marcus had ordered to celebrate his planned betrayal, and the extravagant desserts my children were currently ignoring. "I will take care of the main bill," I said to the waiter, reaching into my bag one more time. I pulled out a solid metal Centurion black card. The heavy card caught the light of the chandelier as I placed it onto the leather tray. Marcus stared at the black card as if it were a loaded weapon. His eyes bulged out of his head. He knew exactly what that card was, and he knew the exorbitant spending requirements needed to maintain it. "Where did you get that card?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and deep confusion. "You do not have that kind of money, Naomi." I smiled warmly at the waiter, who was looking between us with wide eyes. "I have always had my own money, Marcus," I replied calmly. "I just let you pretend to be the sole provider because your fragile male ego desperately needed the validation." "Please process this card for my meal, my husband meal, and my children desserts," I instructed the waiter. "However, I will not be paying for the $200 glass of champagne that his lovely assistant ordered at the bar. He can cover that himself." The waiter nodded quickly and turned to leave. Marcus, immediately puffing his chest out to salvage whatever pride he had left, pulled out his shiny corporate platinum card. "I can pay for my own girlfriend drink," he snapped, tossing the platinum card onto the table. "Go ahead and run it. In fact, put the entire bill on my card. I do not need my wife paying for me." The waiter hesitated, looking at my black card and then at his platinum card. I gave the waiter a polite nod, signaling him to try Marcus' card first. The waiter scurried away to the payment terminal. Chloe smirked, clearly relieved, leaning her head against his shoulder, whispering about how pathetic I was trying to show off with a fake credit card. 2 minutes later, the waiter returned. He did not look happy. He cleared his throat nervously and placed Marcus' platinum card back onto the table. "I am so sorry, sir," the waiter said, keeping his voice low to avoid a scene. "But your card has been declined." "Declined," Marcus shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "That is a corporate platinum account with a $100,000 limit. Run it again. Your machine must be completely broken." "I am sorry, sir, but I did run it twice," the waiter insisted, taking a step back. "The system is showing a hard freeze on the account. You will need to contact your banking institution immediately." Marcus frantically pulled out his phone, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he opened his banking application. I watched the color drain from his face as he stared at the screen showing a zero balance and a red frozen account alert. "What did you do?" he whispered, staring at me with genuine terror. "I told you, Marcus." I smiled, picking up my black card after the waiter successfully charged my portion. "When you handed me those divorce papers 10 minutes ago, my legal team enacted a total asset freeze on the holding company. You do not have access to a single dime." I stood up from the table and smoothed down my dress. "Come on, Malik Tiana," I said gently. "We are going home." My children stood up immediately, walking proudly by my side. As we walked out of the elegant restaurant, I did not look back, but I could hear Marcus desperately yelling at the manager while Chloe complained. The morning sun streamed through the massive bay windows of my kitchen, casting a warm glow over the white marble countertops. I stood there in my silk robe, holding a steaming mug of dark roast coffee, feeling an unexpected sense of profound peace. The chaotic events of the previous night felt like a distant memory. I had finally dropped the heavy burden of playing the supportive background wife to a man who despised my success. Malik and Tiana were still sleeping soundly upstairs, blissfully unaware of the incoming storm. I took a slow sip of my coffee, enjoying the absolute silence of my $2 million home. But the tranquility was violently shattered by the sound of a key aggressively turning in the front door lock. Before I could even set my mug down, the heavy oak door swung open, hitting the wall with a loud bang. Heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer. I did not need to guess who it was. The shrill voice of my mother-in-law Shirley pierced through the quiet morning air, demanding my immediate presence. Right behind her was Valerie, my husband's spoiled younger sister, the golden child, who had never worked a hard day in her entire life. They marched straight into my pristine kitchen, carrying large stacks of flattened brown cardboard boxes. They slammed the heavy boxes down onto my expensive hardwood floors, scratching the polished finish. Shirley stood there with her hands planted firmly on her hips, glaring at me with undisguised hatred. She was wearing her Sunday best dress, clearly treating this eviction like a holy crusade. "You have a lot of nerve drinking coffee in my son's house after what you did to him last night," Shirley yelled, her face turning a deep shade of purple. "Marcus called me in tears. He told me how you caused a massive scene at the restaurant and maliciously froze his corporate accounts out of pure jealousy. You are a spiteful, ungrateful gold digger, Naomi. My son worked his fingers to the bone for 15 long years to build his financial empire and provide you with this luxurious lifestyle. And this is how you repay his endless generosity." Valerie stepped forward aggressively, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my face. "You are absolutely pathetic, Naomi." Valerie sneered, her voice dripping with extreme arrogance. "Marcus finally found a young, beautiful woman who actually understands his high-level corporate ambition. Chloe is a real professional, not some lazy housewife who spends all day doing laundry and spending my brother hard-earned money. He wants you out of this house today so he and Chloe can properly move in and start their new life together. We brought you these boxes so you can pack your cheap clothes and leave. But do not even think about taking the expensive furniture or the electronics, because Marcus paid for every single thing in this house." I listened to their vicious venom without moving a single muscle. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I simply leaned back against the cool marble island and took another slow sip of my hot coffee. The rich, bitter taste grounded me. I looked at Shirley, who was breathing heavily from her angry rant, and then at Valerie, who was glaring at me with a smug sense of victory. They genuinely believed their own delusional narrative. They had spent over a decade worshipping Marcus, treating him like a flawless god who single-handedly lifted their entire family out of poverty. They had completely convinced themselves that I was just a lucky passenger on his glorious ride to wealth. "Are you completely deaf?" Shirley shrieked, taking a threatening step toward me when I did not immediately start crying and apologizing. "I told you to start packing your bags right now. Marcus is going to cancel your credit cards today, and you will have absolutely nothing. Hand over the keys to the house and the keys to the luxury SUV parked in the driveway." I slowly set my coffee mug down on the counter. The ceramic made a sharp clicking sound. I smiled warmly at them, letting the silence stretch out for a few seconds. They exchanged a confused look, unsettled by my lack of panic. "You are too loud for people standing in a house you do not own," I said softly. "And for the record, Shirley, your son did not call you in tears because I caused a scene. He called you in tears because he finally realized he does not own a single asset to his name." I watched their highly confident expressions crack right before my very eyes. But before Shirley could even attempt to reply, the front door opened up once again, revealing the next uninvited guest. Todd walked into my kitchen, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive tailored suit. He was Valerie's husband, a prominent stockbroker who always thought he was the smartest person in any room. He had a deeply annoying habit of talking down to me at every family gathering, constantly mansplaining basic financial concepts as if my brain simply could not comprehend them. Todd gave me a tight, patronizing smile and stepped protectively in front of his wife and mother-in-law. "Let us all just take a deep breath and handle this like rational adults," he said, using his slick corporate voice. "Naomi, I know you are feeling very emotional right now. Divorce is hard, especially when you do not have a career to fall back on. But I need you to listen to me very carefully, because you do not understand the complex legal reality of your situation. Marcus had my firm set up an irrevocable asset protection trust for his company over 3 years ago. All of his wealth, all of the real estate, the cars, the liquid assets are fully shielded. If you try to take this to a judge, you will get completely buried in legal fees and end up with nothing. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a leather-bound checkbook. He clicked an expensive pen and began writing. I convinced Marcus to be generous. Todd continued, not even looking up as he wrote. I am writing you a check for $50,000. This is a massive favor I am doing for you, Naomi. Take the money, pack your things, and walk away quietly. Do not embarrass yourself by fighting a legal battle you cannot possibly win. He ripped the check from the pad and slid it across the marble island toward me. I looked down at the check. $50,000 to walk away from my own multi-million-dollar company. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. Todd frowned, his patronizing smile finally dropping. Do you find something funny about this generous offer, Naomi? He asked, his tone sharpening into annoyance. I did not take the check. Instead, I turned around and opened the top drawer of my kitchen island. I pulled out a thick black binder that I had printed out at 3 in the morning. I dropped it heavily onto the counter right next to his insulting check. I find it incredibly funny, Todd, I replied, leaning forward, that a man who is about to face federal prison time is trying to give me legal advice. Todd froze. Shirley and Valerie exchanged confused glances. What on earth are you talking about? Valerie demanded, stepping out from behind her husband. Todd is a highly respected senior broker. He was a highly respected broker, I corrected her, tapping my fingernail against the cover of the black binder, until he decided to start playing fast and loose with his elderly clients' retirement funds. You see, Todd, you and Marcus thought you were so clever. You thought the blind trust would keep your names completely hidden. But you forgot one crucial detail. Since I am the legal majority shareholder of the holding company, I have absolute, unrestricted access to audit the secondary ledgers, and I did a very thorough audit last month. Todd's face lost all its color. His eyes locked onto the black binder, as if it were a live bomb. I opened the cover and flipped to a page highlighted in bright yellow marker. Let us look at the third quarter financials, I said, reading the numbers aloud. Marcus' company showed a massive sudden influx of $1.5 million in capital. Marcus used that inflated valuation to secure more luxury loans and buy Chloe her expensive gifts. But that money did not come from legitimate corporate investors, did it, Todd? Todd swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing nervously. He tried to speak, but no words came out. I looked directly into his terrified eyes. You illegally funneled your clients' protected retirement funds into Marcus' company through a series of shell corporations, I stated clearly, letting the gravity of the crime hang in the air. You committed massive wire fraud to artificially inflate my husband's business so you could take a massive illegal commission. And you did it all under the arrogant assumption that the little stay-at-home wife would never look at the actual accounting books. That is an absolute lie, Todd choked out, but his voice was shaking so badly he sounded like a frightened child. Those were legitimate alternative investments. You do not understand what you are reading. Oh, I understand perfectly, I countered, closing the binder with a sharp snap. I understand that stealing is a federal crime, Todd. I understand exactly what you and Marcus did behind my back. I did not stop at understanding, Todd. I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy tension. Yesterday afternoon, while Marcus was busy picking out his fancy suit for our anniversary dinner, I officially filed a comprehensive whistleblower report with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I included full certified copies of your illegal secondary ledgers, the direct wire transfer receipts, and the fake shell corporation registration documents. The federal investigators already have absolutely everything they need to lock you away. Todd staggered backward as if I had physically struck him in the chest. His expensive leather briefcase slipped from his sweaty grip and crashed onto the hardwood floor. The arrogant stockbroker persona evaporated completely, leaving behind a terrified, desperate man facing a real federal prison sentence. He frantically patted down his suit pockets, pulling out his cell phone with violently shaking hands. He ignored his wife completely and immediately dialed Marcus. When Marcus answered, Todd just started screaming. "You promised me the trust would shield us!" Todd roared into the phone, his face turning angry red. "You told me your stupid wife did not know anything about the financial structure. She has the secondary ledgers, you idiot. She sent everything directly to the SEC. My entire career is over because of your reckless arrogance." Valerie tried to place a calming hand on Todd's shoulder, but he violently shoved her away. "Do not touch me, Valerie," he snapped, glaring at her with pure hatred. "If I am going down for wire fraud, I am dragging Marcus down with me. I am calling my lawyers to cut an immunity deal right now." Todd turned around and sprinted out the front door, leaving his heavy briefcase right where it fell. Valerie burst into loud, hysterical tears, running out quickly after him, begging him to stop and talk to her. The grand family ambush had completely shattered into a million tiny pieces in less than 5 minutes. Shirley was left standing entirely alone in my spacious kitchen, her chest heaving with panicked, ragged breaths. She realized her precious son was about to lose his financial empire and go to jail. With a sudden feral grunt, Shirley lunged across the kitchen, grabbing violently for the black binder. She clearly thought that destroying my physical copy would somehow magically erase the digital files currently sitting on the desks of federal investigators. But before her grasping fingers could even touch the thick plastic cover, a tall figure stepped quickly in front of me. It was my 14-year-old son, Malik. He stood perfectly firm, his broad shoulders squared off against his own grandmother. His expression was an exact mirror image of my own, cold and completely unbothered. "Do not even think about touching my mother or her property," Malik warned, his voice surprisingly deep and authoritative. Shirley froze immediately, her wrinkled hands hovering awkwardly in mid-air. She looked up at her teenage grandson, completely shocked. "Malik, you step aside right now," Shirley commanded, trying to regain her dominant matriarchal tone. "My father ruined his own life," Malik replied sharply, not moving a single inch. "We were there at the restaurant last night, Grandma. We heard every single hateful word he said to Mom. We saw his new young girlfriend. He does not care about us, so we do not care about his fake business. Now back away from the counter before I grab my phone and call the cops myself." I felt a massive swell of maternal pride well up deep inside my chest. I gently placed my hand on Malik's strong shoulder, silently thanking him for his unwavering bravery. "You heard my son, Shirley," I said calmly, picking up my warm coffee mug once again. "Your pathetic attempt to intimidate me in my own home has failed miserably. Your golden child son is bankrupt, and your son-in-law is about to be federally indicted. I suggest you take these empty cardboard boxes and bring them directly to Marcus. Because when my lawyers terminate the corporate lease on the luxury townhouse you are currently living in, you are going to need them. Now get out of my house now before I dial 911 and have you arrested for criminal trespassing." I ordered, my stern tone leaving absolutely no room for any debate. Shirley stared at me with pure venom in her eyes, but she knew she was completely beaten. She slowly backed away from the counter, turned around, and marched out the front door, leaving the empty moving boxes scattered across the floor. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her. I looked at Malik, who let out a long, heavy breath. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked softly. I smiled warmly. "I am more than okay, Malik," I whispered. "We are finally completely free." While I was enjoying the newfound peace inside my home, Marcus was experiencing the exact opposite across town. His carefully constructed reality was rapidly crumbling. Every single corporate credit card he tried to swipe was immediately declined. His primary banking applications permanently locked him out, displaying terrifying error messages about seized funds. But Marcus possessed an ego the size of a small planet, and his immense pride simply would not allow him to look weak in front of his young, impressionable mistress. Chloe was already growing highly impatient. She had fully expected to wake up sipping mimosas in a $2 million suburban mansion, but instead she was sitting in a cramped hotel room, complaining loudly about the mediocre room service and the uncomfortable mattress. Marcus knew he had to act fast to maintain his wealthy facade and keep her firmly under his control. He firmly believed my legal asset freeze was just a temporary scare tactic that his high-priced lawyers would easily reverse by the end of the week. Operating under that massive delusion, Marcus made the worst financial decision of his entire life. He reached out to a dangerous shadow lender who specialized in rapid, high-interest personal loans. Because his legitimate assets were completely frozen, Marcus deliberately submitted forged corporate tax returns and fraudulently listed my privately owned commercial properties as his personal collateral. He committed felony bank fraud to secure a quick cash injection of $500,000. The predatory loan came with an absolutely suffocating 40% interest rate, but Marcus did not care about the long-term consequences. He just needed the immediate cash flow to aggressively prove to Chloe and to himself that he was still the untouchable king of his domain. He wanted to send a loud public message that I was completely powerless against his superior business intellect. The very second the illicit funds hit his temporary offshore account, Marcus went on a reckless and spectacular spending spree. He marched directly into a high-end jewelry boutique downtown and purchased a breathtaking $50,000 diamond necklace. He then drove straight to a luxury real estate office and dropped a massive cash down payment on a stunning top-floor penthouse overlooking the beautiful city skyline. He wanted to show everyone that losing our family home meant absolutely nothing to him because he could easily upgrade to something much better. He handed the shiny brass keys to Chloe, telling her that my little temper tantrum was already handled and their glamorous new life was officially beginning today. He thought he had brilliantly outsmarted me, completely unaware that my forensic accounting team was already tracking every single illicit digital transaction he made in real time. Chloe was absolutely thrilled with her shiny new toys. She immediately pulled out her expensive phone and began documenting her lavish spoils for the entire world to see. She posted a rapid series of videos on her public Instagram page showing off the sparkling diamond necklace draped elegantly across her collarbone and giving her followers a grand tour of the massive empty penthouse. She giggled loudly into the camera, calling herself the beautiful new reigning queen of the city. But her intense vanity was simply not enough to satisfy her cruel ego. She wanted to purposefully twist the knife deep into my back. She wanted to humiliate me and assert her absolute dominance over my entire family. In a move of pure malicious spite, Chloe deliberately tagged my teenage children in her public posts. Malik and Tiana were sitting quietly in the living room, doing their homework, when their phones suddenly buzzed loudly with the social media notifications. Tiana's screen lit up with a video of Chloe drinking expensive champagne on a luxury balcony overlooking the crowded downtown streets. The arrogant caption read, "Upgrading to the penthouse life," while the bitter ex-wife stays behind in the boring old suburbs. Chloe actually tagged Tiana's personal account right in the main caption, ensuring my young daughter would be forced to see the woman who destroyed our family, aggressively flaunting her stolen wealth. Tiana's dark brown eyes filled with hot, angry tears as she walked over and showed me the glowing phone screen. Malik clenched his fists tightly, his jaw set hard with a silent, furious, protective energy. They were trying to break my children to make them feel small, unimportant, and entirely forgotten by their own father. But watching Chloe gloat proudly on that tiny digital screen did not make me feel defeated or sad in the slightest. It only fueled my burning determination to completely dismantle their pathetic little fantasy world piece by piece. They thought they were being incredibly clever, but they had just handed me the exact weapon I desperately needed to end this. The afternoon sun beat down on the manicured circular driveway of the elite private academy my children attended. I arrived 20 minutes early to secure my spot near the front of the student pickup line. I parked my reliable family minivan, a vehicle I chose for safety rather than flashy vanity, and stepped out into the warm air. Several mothers from the Parent-Teacher Association were already gathered on the sidewalk chatting casually about upcoming charity bake sales. I greeted them with my usual polite smile, betraying absolutely nothing about the massive storm currently raging through my personal life. I stood leaning against the passenger side door of my van, checking my watch and waiting for the final school bell to ring. 10 minutes later, the loud, aggressive roar of a high-performance engine shattered the suburban atmosphere. A sleek silver Porsche Panamera came speeding around the corner, entirely ignoring the 15-mile-per-hour school zone speed limit. The expensive sports car screeched to a sudden halt directly behind my minivan, blocking the pedestrian crosswalk. The driver's side door swung open and Chloe stepped out, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and a tight white dress, completely inappropriate for a middle school pickup line. Around her neck, resting prominently against her collarbone, was the massive $50,000 diamond necklace Marcus had illegally purchased just a few hours ago. She slammed the car door shut and marched past the line of waiting parents, her high heels clicking sharply against the concrete pavement. She spotted me leaning against my van, and a massive, cruel smirk spread across her perfectly contoured face. She purposefully altered her path, walking directly toward me, ensuring that every mother in the vicinity was watching our interaction. "Well, look who it is!" Chloe announced, her voice loud and deliberately projecting across the quiet courtyard. "I honestly did not expect to see you here today, Naomi. Marcus told me you would probably be at home crying into a cheap bottle of wine while you packed your bags." The surrounding mothers instantly stopped their conversations. The silence in the courtyard became completely deafening. Everyone immediately turned their heads to watch the unfolding drama. I did not move from my relaxed position against the minivan. I simply crossed my arms and looked at her with an expression of mild amusement. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." "Chloe," I replied smoothly, "I am picking up my children, something you have absolutely no business doing." "Oh, I have every right to be here," Chloe laughed, tossing her long hair over her shoulder. "Marcus officially asked me to take over the afternoon school runs from now on. He wants Malik and Tiana to start getting used to their new stepmother as soon as possible. After all, they are going to spend a lot of time at our luxurious downtown penthouse." She aggressively gestured toward the silver Porsche glistening in the sun. "I figured I would bring the Porsche today so the kids do not have to be deeply embarrassed by riding home in that raggedy, pathetic little minivan of yours. You should have Marcus buy you a decent vehicle before he cuts you off financially." Gasps rippled through the small crowd of wealthy suburban mothers. They were absolutely horrified by her blatant audacity, but also captivated by the scandalous spectacle. Chloe soaked up their shocked attention like a dry sponge. She genuinely believed she was asserting her ultimate dominance, establishing herself as the young, beautiful victor who had stolen the wealthy husband. She reached up and purposefully adjusted the massive diamond necklace, making sure the sunlight caught the expensive stones and reflected a blinding sparkle. "That is a very beautiful necklace, Chloe," I said, my voice remaining perfectly steady and conversational. "Marcus must have gone to a lot of trouble to acquire such an expensive piece of jewelry on such short notice." "He certainly did," Chloe bragged, taking a confident step closer to me. "He bought it for me this morning in cash to celebrate our new life together. He said I deserve the absolute best because I am a real woman who actually supports his massive corporate vision. Unlike some lazy stay-at-home wives who do nothing but drain his hard-earned bank accounts." She laughed again, a sharp, mocking sound that echoed loudly across the brick walls of the school building. She was completely unaware that every single arrogant word leaving her mouth was being carefully and mentally recorded. She thought she was successfully humiliating me in front of my peers, but she was actually standing right in the center of a massive invisible trap. I smiled warmly at her, my eyes slowly shifting from her gloating face to the heavy silver necklace resting around her throat. I smiled warmly at her, my eyes slowly shifting from her gloating face to the heavy silver necklace resting around her throat. It is indeed a stunning piece of jewelry, Chloe. I agreed, my voice remaining perfectly calm and measured. But there is a big difference between a wealthy man buying his mistress a beautiful gift and a desperate man committing a major federal crime just to impress a girl. Chloe frowned, her smug expression faltering for a brief second before she forced out another condescending laugh. "You are just jealous and completely delusional," she snapped, taking a step back toward the luxury sports car. But I did not argue with her. I simply took a step to my right, revealing the tall man in a dark gray suit who had been standing quietly behind my minivan the entire time. He stepped forward, his expression stern and completely unreadable. He did not look like one of the wealthy suburban fathers who usually frequented the school pickup line. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a leather badge holder, flipping it open for Chloe to see clearly. "I am Special Agent Thomas with the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service," the man announced, his voice carrying a heavy weight of authority that instantly silenced the remaining whispers in the courtyard. Chloe stared at the shiny gold badge, her eyes widening in sudden confusion. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice losing its confident edge. "Is this some kind of pathetic joke, Naomi? Did you hire a fake actor to try and scare me away from your kids?" "I did not hire anyone, Chloe," I replied, folding my hands neatly in front of me. "Agent Thomas is very real, and he is here because of the extremely shiny necklace currently resting on your chest. You see, Marcus did not use his own money to buy that expensive diamond necklace today. His personal and corporate accounts are completely frozen. Instead, he panicked and made a stupid decision to maintain his wealthy facade." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick stack of printed banking documents. I held them up so Chloe could see the bright red highlighting on the top page. "Marcus used fraudulent collateral to secure a predatory cash loan this morning," I explained, watching the color slowly drain from her face. "But that loan was not enough to cover the massive down payment on the penthouse and your expensive jewelry. So he decided to quietly wire an additional $50,000 from a completely different account. He transferred the money directly from the corporate nonprofit charity branch, the charity fund that was strictly established to provide housing assistance for underprivileged families in our local community." The mothers in the courtyard gasped loudly, stepping away from Chloe as if she were suddenly contagious. Chloe touched the diamond necklace, her fingers trembling slightly. "That is a lie," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously between me and the federal agent. "Marcus would never steal from a charity. He is a respected financial consultant." "He is a thief, Chloe," I corrected her sharply. "And unfortunately for him, he completely forgot that I am the legal acting chair of that specific nonprofit organization. Every single transaction requires my secondary digital authorization, or it immediately triggers an automatic fraud alert directly to my accounting team. The moment he wired those charity funds to the jewelry boutique, my team flagged the illicit transaction and contacted the federal authorities. You are currently wearing $50,000 of stolen charity money around your neck while standing on a school campus." Agent Thomas took another firm step forward, closing the distance between them. "Miss, we have already confirmed the specific serial numbers on the jewelry purchase receipt," he stated coldly. "Marcus committed felony wire fraud and embezzlement of nonprofit funds. Because he used those stolen funds to purchase the necklace you are currently wearing, that piece of jewelry is now considered stolen property. It is crucial material evidence in an active federal investigation." Chloe looked down at the diamonds as if they were suddenly burning her skin. She fumbled blindly with the delicate metal clasp behind her neck, trying frantically to take it off. "I did not know," she stammered, tears of genuine panic welling up in her eyes. "I had absolutely nothing to do with this massive crime. He gave it to me this morning and I thought it was just a generous gift." "Ignorance of the law does not automatically grant you immunity from the severe consequences, Chloe," I said, softly, watching her entire arrogant world crash down. "I told you that playing games with me would end badly, yet you decided to show up here today to gloat." As the final word left my mouth, the distinct wail of police sirens began to echo down the suburban street. The sound grew louder until two local police cruisers turned sharply into the school circular driveway. Their red and blue emergency lights flashed brilliantly against the pristine silver paint of the Porsche Panamera. The wealthy mothers collectively gasped, pulling their expensive handbags tighter against their chests as they backed away to give the authorities room. Chloe stood frozen in place, her designer shoes suddenly looking like heavy concrete blocks pinning her to the pavement. Two uniformed officers stepped out of the lead cruiser and walked briskly toward us. Agent Thomas met them halfway, flashing his federal badge and explaining the situation in a low professional tone. He pointed directly at the diamond necklace still resting against Chloe's trembling collarbone. The officers nodded in unison and turned their stern focus entirely onto her. "Misplace your hands behind your back." One of the local officers instructed, pulling heavy metal handcuffs from his utility belt. "You are officially under arrest for possession of stolen property and suspicion of grand larceny." Chloe let out a loud, terrified shriek that echoed off the brick walls. "No, please, you cannot do this," she begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "I am just a victim in all of this. I did not steal anything. Please let me call Marcus. He will clear all of this up right now. He is a very powerful man." Agent Thomas stepped forward and carefully unclasped the heavy diamond necklace from her throat. He dropped the sparkling jewelry into a clear plastic evidence bag, sealing it. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Thomas recited loudly, securing the stolen asset. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the local officers grabbed her arms and snapped the cold steel cuffs around her wrists, Chloe managed to pull her expensive smartphone from her small designer purse. Her hands shook violently as she hit speed dial for Marcus. The phone rang loudly on speaker mode for everyone in the courtyard to hear. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then went straight to an automated voicemail message. Chloe sobbed uncontrollably, screaming his name into the phone before the officer took the device away from her. She had absolutely no idea why Marcus was ignoring her desperate phone calls, but I knew exactly what was happening downtown. At that very moment, Marcus was not sitting comfortably behind his massive mahogany desk plotting his next arrogant move. He was standing on the hot concrete sidewalk outside his own corporate headquarters, his expensive suit wrinkling in the afternoon humidity. He was frantically swiping his electronic keycard against the glass entrance doors, but the light just kept flashing red. Two burly security guards, men he had personally hired just last year, were physically blocking him from entering the building. My legal team had officially served the eviction notices and locked him out of the entire facility. He was completely powerless, isolated, and unable to answer his phone because he was too busy screaming at the security guards who refused to let him retrieve his own car keys. The shrill ringing of the afternoon school bell broke the tense atmosphere in the courtyard. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and dozens of students began pouring out onto the school front steps. Malik and Tiana were among the first to walk out. They stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes widening as they took in the chaotic scene. They saw the flashing police lights, the federal agent, and Chloe sobbing hysterically in the back of a police cruiser. I did not want my children to be part of this ugly spectacle any longer than necessary. I walked calmly past the whispering mothers and met Malik and Tiana at the bottom of the concrete steps. I placed a gentle, reassuring hand on each of their shoulders. "How was school today?" I asked, my voice projecting a warm and completely unbothered tone. "It was fine, Mom," Malik replied, his eyes darting quickly toward the police cars before looking back at me with a small, knowing smile. Tiana grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly as we walked past the silver Porsche together. We climbed into our reliable family minivan, leaving the drama and the criminal consequences entirely behind us. As I started the engine and drove smoothly out of the school parking lot, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. Chloe was driven away to the county jail and Marcus was completely locked out of his stolen kingdom. The first phase of my plan was officially complete, but the real corporate massacre was just about to begin. The very next morning, the real corporate massacre officially began. Since my legal team had successfully locked Marcus out of his own pristine glass headquarters, He was forced to desperately scramble. He rented a massive executive conference room at a nearby luxury hotel, spending the last of his quickly dwindling cash reserves to project an illusion of total control. He immediately summoned all the senior partners, key investors, and executive board members for an emergency meeting. He knew his only remaining chance of survival was to completely turn the board against me before I could present them with the undeniable truth. When the 12 board members arrived and took their seats around the long mahogany table, Marcus was already pacing at the front of the room. His usually immaculate suit was noticeably wrinkled, and there were dark, exhausted bags under his eyes. Sitting quietly in the corner of the room was his mother, Shirley. She was dressed in dark, somber clothing, clutching a crumpled white tissue in her trembling hands. She was there to play a very specific role, the grieving, devastated mother of a victimized son. Marcus cleared his throat loudly, demanding the attention of the confused room. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "As many of you know, my wife Naomi and I are currently going through a very bitter and unexpected divorce. I wanted to keep this private, but unfortunately, she has decided to aggressively attack the very foundation of this company out of pure malicious spite." He paused dramatically, looking around the table to gauge their reactions. Several board members frowned, exchanging worried glances. Marcus leaned forward, placing both hands firmly on the table. "Naomi has illegally exploited a minor loophole in our original founding documents," he lied smoothly. "She used this tiny technicality to enact a temporary freeze on our corporate accounts. She is a hysterical, jealous woman who is trying to violently tear down a highly successful Black-owned business simply because I decided to leave her." Shirley let out a loud sob from the corner. She stood up slowly, dabbing at her dry eyes with the tissue. "My son worked his entire life to build this company from nothing," Shirley cried out, her voice shaking with fake emotion. Naomi never lifted a single finger to help him. She just sat in her expensive house spending his hard-earned money while he stayed at the office until midnight every single night. Now she wants to completely destroy the livelihoods of everyone in this room just to punish my poor boy. The board members began to mutter among themselves. A few of the older investors who had known Marcus for years nodded in sympathetic agreement. Marcus saw the narrative shifting in his favor and immediately pushed his advantage. He stood up straight, adjusting his tie. "I will not let a bitter housewife destroy what we have built together," he declared confidently. "We have a clear legal path to immediately oust her from the operating agreement. All I need is a majority board vote to forcefully restructure the holding company and completely void her shares." A senior investor named Robert crossed his arms, looking highly skeptical. "And what exactly happens to her original equity if we vote to force her out?" Robert asked, narrowing his eyes. Marcus smiled, a cold, greedy expression spreading across his face. "I am glad you asked, Robert," he replied smoothly. "If you all stand with me today and vote to legally remove Naomi from the company structure, I will personally redistribute her entire 80% equity stake among all of you. Your ownership shares will instantly double. You will all become significantly wealthier by the end of the week." A heavy silence fell over the conference room as the greedy proposal hung in the air. Double equity was a massive financial windfall. The initial skepticism on the faces of the board members quickly morphed into quiet, calculating greed. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing. He was bribing them with my own money to secure their complete loyalty. He looked around the room, seeing the greedy nods of agreement, and felt a massive surge of arrogant triumph. He genuinely believed he had outsmarted me. He thought he had painted me as the crazy ex-wife and secured the necessary votes to steal my company. "Let us take the official vote right now," Marcus announced eagerly, reaching for a stack of legal documents he had hastily prepared. "We will sign these amendments and cut her out today." Shirley smiled proudly at her son, completely convinced that they had easily won the war. But their premature victory celebration was violently interrupted. The heavy oak door at the back of the conference room suddenly swung open. I stepped through the heavy oak doors wearing a navy blue suit. Flanking me on either side were three of the most feared corporate litigators in the entire state. We walked into the crowded executive conference room with a synchronized, steady rhythm that commanded total attention. The 12 board members turned their heads in complete shock, freezing mid-air over the documents Marcus had handed them. Shirley let out a dramatic gasp, dropping her crumpled white tissue onto the expensive carpet. Marcus shot up from his leather chair at the head of the table. "What do you think you are doing here, Naomi?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "This is a closed private executive board meeting and you are completely unauthorized to be in this room." He looked frantically past my shoulder toward the hallway. "Security!" he barked loudly, waving his arms. "Security, get in here right now and forcefully remove this crazy woman." Two large armed security guards stepped into the doorway, but they did not move toward me. They stood perfectly still, their hands folded neatly behind their backs. "I told you to throw her out!" Marcus screamed, slamming his fist onto the solid mahogany table. "I am the chief executive officer of this company, and I am giving you a direct legal order." The head of security, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Jackson, calmly stepped forward. He looked directly at Marcus with an expression of pure professional indifference. "I am sorry, sir," Jackson stated, his voice deep and entirely unbothered by the angry outburst. "But my security team does not work for you or your financial firm. We are directly contracted by the commercial real estate holding company that officially owns this luxury hotel and the surrounding business park." Marcus blinked rapidly, his brain struggling to process the new information. So what, he demanded aggressively. "I am paying top dollar to rent this conference room for the entire afternoon. That means you work for me right now." "Actually, Marcus," I interrupted, stepping closer to the massive table. "The commercial real estate holding company that owns this entire hotel property is a direct subsidiary of my primary private trust. So, technically speaking, Jackson and his entire security staff work exclusively for me. I gave them strict instructions to allow my legal team full access to this room today." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled across the board members. Shirley sank lower into her chair, her fake tears instantly drying up. But Marcus' allies were not ready to surrender their promised double equity just yet. Robert stood up and pointed a thick finger at my face. "Listen here, little lady." Robert sneered, his tone dripping with patronizing disrespect. "We do not care if you own the building or the security company. You do not belong in high-level corporate business discussions. Marcus just explained exactly how you have been maliciously trying to ruin this company out of petty marital spite. You are holding our hard-earned money hostage, and we will not tolerate it. We are taking a formal board vote right now to officially strip you of your majority shares and completely remove you from the operating agreement. So take your expensive lawyers and kindly leave before we counter-sue you for severe financial damages." A few other board members chuckled loudly, nodding in strong agreement with Robert. They looked at me as if I were a foolish, naive child playing a game I could not possibly understand. They honestly believed their unified corporate boys' club mentality would easily intimidate me into backing down. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of anger. I simply turned to my lead attorney, an incredibly sharp woman named Eleanor, and gave her a very slight nod. Eleanor unclasped her heavy leather briefcase and pulled out 12 thick black folders. Without speaking a single word, my legal team began walking around the large mahogany table, gently placing one black folder directly in front of each board member, right on top of the fraudulent papers Marcus had given them. "What is this garbage?" Marcus demanded, snatching the folder nearest to him with violently trembling hands. "More of your fake financial audits to try and scare my investors away." "No, Marcus," I replied, walking slowly toward the head of the table until I was standing right across from his panicked face. "Those are the original certified founding documents from 15 years ago. But unlike the heavily redacted versions you have been showing these investors for the past decade, these folders contain the complete unedited corporate contracts, including the specific phantom equity agreement you eagerly signed when you were completely bankrupt and begging me to save you from absolute financial ruin. Please open them, gentlemen, and read the absolute truth." The 12 men around the massive mahogany table hesitated for a brief moment before Robert slowly reached out and flipped open the heavy black cover. The other board members quickly followed suit. The only sound in the tense conference room was the sharp rustling of crisp paper as they scanned the densely typed legal documents. Eleanor, my lead attorney, stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking authoritatively against the hardwood floor. She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at the investors. Let me direct your attention to page 4 of the original operating agreement, gentlemen. Eleanor began, her voice echoing with absolute authority. 15 years ago, Marcus was completely drowning in massive personal debt. His previous business venture had failed spectacularly, leaving him with a ruined credit score and multiple pending lawsuits. No reputable banking institution in this country would approve him for a commercial loan. He was entirely bankrupt. Marcus slammed his hands on the table. That is ancient history, he shouted, his face turning red. I rebuilt myself. I built this entire financial firm with my own bare hands and my own sweat equity. Sweat equity does not legally override a signed foundational trust agreement, Marcus. Eleanor countered sharply, not missing a single beat. As you can clearly see in Section 2, my client Naomi provided the entire initial seed capital of $50,000 using her personal inheritance. In exchange for saving him from total financial ruin, Marcus eagerly signed a nominee director agreement. He was legally appointed as a figurehead, a public face, to manage the day-to-day operations. He never actually owned the underlying corporate equity. He was merely vesting it over a 20-year period. The board members flipped frantically to page 4, their eyes scanning the highlighted paragraphs. Robert's face grew pale as he read the undeniable legal terms. He looked up at Marcus, his previous loyalty rapidly dissolving into pure anger. You told us you were the sole majority founder, Robert growled, pointing an accusing finger at Marcus. You told us you owned 80% of the voting shares outright. I do own them, Marcus stammered frantically, wiping beads of sweat from his forehead. That contract is outdated. I am the chief executive officer. I make the executive decisions. You made the executive decisions, Eleanor corrected him, stepping closer to the table. But your position and your vesting schedule were strictly contingent upon your adherence to a very specific set of behavioral and financial rules. Please turn to page 7, gentlemen. The morality and fiduciary clauses. Eleanor paused, letting the board members find the exact page before she delivered the fatal blow. According to the strict terms of the contract, the nominee director must maintain the highest standard of ethical behavior to protect the public image of the holding company. Last night, Marcus publicly announced an adulterous affair and aggressively humiliated the primary shareholder in a crowded restaurant. That alone is a direct violation of the morality clause. But that is just a petty marital dispute, Marcus argued, desperately looking around the room for any sympathy. You cannot steal my entire company over a divorce. It is not a petty dispute when you combine it with massive corporate fraud, Eleanor stated, her voice dropping to a dangerously cold register. Early this morning, Marcus deliberately embezzled $50,000 from the corporate nonprofit charity branch to purchase a diamond necklace for his young mistress. A mistress who is currently sitting in a county jail cell facing federal grand larceny charges. Furthermore, we have definitive proof that Marcus conspired with Todd to artificially inflate corporate valuations using stolen client retirement funds. He also used fraudulent company collateral to secure a high-interest predatory personal loan just 3 hours ago. The conference room erupted into chaotic shouting. The investors were absolutely horrified. Embezzling charity funds and committing federal bank fraud were massive liabilities that could completely destroy their own financial portfolios. Shirley covered her face with her hands, finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of her son's crimes. All of these actions constitute a severe and irrevocable breach of your fiduciary duties. Eleanor continued, raising her voice slightly to cut through the loud shouting. And according to the final penalty clause on page 9, any breach of these specific duties instantly triggers an automatic equity recall. Eleanor reached into her tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crisp $1 bill. She walked to the head of the table and slid the green bill across the polished mahogany until it stopped right in front of Marcus, shaking hands. By committing public adultery and massive financial fraud, you have completely forfeited your entire vesting schedule, Eleanor concluded with brutal finality. Every single share of your unvested and vested equity has been officially revoked and recalled to the primary shareholder for the legally required sum of $1. You own exactly 0% of this company, Marcus. You have absolutely nothing left to offer these investors. Marcus stared blankly at the $1 bill, his mouth hanging open in silent, absolute devastation. The brilliant corporate illusion he had arrogantly maintained for 15 long years had just been completely obliterated in less than 5 minutes. Robert was the first to break the silence. He turned past the founding agreements to the detailed federal documents clipped in the back. His eyes scanned the Securities and Exchange Commission whistleblower report I had filed yesterday. The transaction records clearly showed Marcus and Todd moving massive amounts of stolen client retirement funds through illicit offshore shell corporations. Robert's face turned a sickly shade of gray as he realized the massive legal liability sitting right in front of him. "Are you completely insane, Marcus?" Robert shouted, slamming the folder down onto the polished mahogany table. "You used our legitimate corporate infrastructure to launder stolen money with your crooked brother-in-law. Do you realize what the federal government will do to this prestigious firm if they think we were complicit? We could face severe federal prison time and have our personal assets completely seized before the end of the week." The other board members frantically began flipping through their copies of the federal reports. Cold panic instantly spread across the room like a terrifying, invisible wildfire. These were wealthy, powerful men who only cared about protecting their massive fortunes. The promised double equity that Marcus had arrogantly dangled in front of them 10 minutes ago now looked like a highly toxic radioactive trap. They realized in a terrifying instant that Marcus was a reckless criminal who had almost dragged them into absolute ruin. "I am the sole primary capital holder of this financial institution," I announced, my voice slicing cleanly through their panicked shouting. "I own the buildings you work in, the massive servers that hold your sensitive data, and the underlying core capital that funds your operations. I have fully cooperated with federal authorities to ensure the legitimate side of this firm remains protected, but I will immediately liquidate the entire company and freeze every active account if the man responsible for this massive criminal liability remains sitting in the chief executive chair for 1 minute." The threat was incredibly clear and effective. The board members looked at me and finally saw the absolute truth. I was not the bitter, hysterical housewife Marcus had desperately tried to portray me as. I was the actual billionaire holding the leash to their entire financial future, and Marcus was just a diseased liability that needed to be surgically removed immediately. "I call for an immediate emergency vote," Robert declared, standing up so fast his leather chair crashed loudly to the floor behind him. In light of the undeniable concrete evidence of massive federal fraud and severe fiduciary breach, I move to formally terminate Marcus from his position, effective immediately. I also move to fully sever all legal and financial ties and permanently ban him from all corporate properties, starting right now. "I second that motion," an older, wealthy investor named William shouted from across the table, glaring at Marcus with pure, unfiltered disgust. "All in favor," Robert demanded loudly, his voice echoing. Every single man around the massive mahogany table violently raised his right hand into the air. The official vote was completely unanimous. There was no hesitation, no quiet debate, and absolutely no loyalty. The corporate brotherhood Marcus had heavily relied on instantly evaporated the second their own money was genuinely threatened. "You cannot do this to me!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. He looked wildly around the room at the men he had called his closest friends and business partners for over a decade. "I made you all rich. You owe me your careers. You cannot just throw me out like worthless trash. Robert, we play golf every single weekend. William the First paid for your daughter medical school. You are all a bunch of backstabbing, selfish traitors." The room remained completely ice cold. No one lowered their hands. No one offered him a single ounce of genuine sympathy. They just stared at him with cold, dead, unforgiving eyes. Even his own mother Shirley sat entirely frozen in the corner, her wrinkled hands covering her mouth in absolute terror, unable to speak a single word in his defense. She finally understood that her golden child was completely ruined. The formal motion carries Robert stated coldly, picking up his chair and sitting back down with a heavy sigh. You are officially terminated, Marcus. You do not work here anymore. Now get out of our boardroom before we have the armed security guards drag you out into the street in handcuffs. Marcus stood trembling violently at the head of the table, his breathing incredibly ragged and shallow. He looked at the 12 wealthy investors who had just eagerly voted to completely destroy his entire life. Then his bloodshot, panicked eyes slowly turned toward me, the one woman he had gleefully humiliated in a crowded restaurant just 2 very short days ago. Naomi, please. Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. You do not have to do this. We have been married for 15 years. We have 2 beautiful children together. You cannot just erase everything we built over one stupid mistake. I was stressed. I was having a midlife crisis. But I love you, Naomi. I have always loved you. You are the mother of my children and my only true partner. His desperate attempt to weaponize our children and history was nauseating. The same man who had confidently called me a stay-at-home leech in front of our kids was now crying genuine tears, trying to sell me a pathetic love story. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, hollow sense of finality. You did not build anything, Marcus, I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the massive room. You simply occupied the space I paid for, and your lease has officially expired. Eleanor stepped sharply between us. She reached into her briefcase one final time and pulled out a thick stack of aggressively red stamped documents. She slapped them down onto the table, right next to the $1 bill. As the newly recognized primary executive of this holding company, my client has authorized the immediate repossession of all corporate assets currently in your physical possession, Eleanor stated cleanly. Marcus stared blankly at the red stamped papers. Repossession, he whispered, his eyes darting frantically. What exactly does that mean? Empty your pockets right now, Marcus, Eleanor commanded, holding out her hand. Hand over the physical keys to the silver Porsche Panamera. Hand over the electronic access cards for the downtown penthouse. Hand over every single corporate credit card, bank token, and the company-issued smartphone you are currently holding. The commercial lease for the penthouse has been officially canceled due to severe fraudulent activity. And as you already know, the Porsche is currently sitting in a police impound lot as material evidence. You cannot take my phone, Marcus shrieked, taking a stumbling step backward and clutching his jacket pockets defensively. All of my personal contacts are in there. My entire life is in that phone. You are leaving me with absolutely nothing. We are leaving you with the exact same amount of equity you brought into this relationship 15 years ago. Eleanor replied, her tone completely devoid of any sympathy. 0. Hand over the property immediately, or security will extract it and add theft to your federal charges. Marcus shook his head violently, tears streaming freely down his panicked face. He looked toward his mother, Shirley, for help, but she was already backing away toward the heavy oak doors, too terrified to associate herself with a federally investigated criminal. Please, Mom, help me, Marcus sobbed, reaching a hand out toward her. But Shirley just turned her face away and quickly slipped out of the conference room, leaving her golden child completely abandoned to face the brutal consequences alone. Jackson did not wait for an invitation. He and his second guard stepped forward with swift military precision. Jackson grabbed Marcus firmly by the shoulders, while the other guard quickly and professionally patted down his expensive suit pockets. Marcus kicked and thrashed, screaming obscenities, but he was completely powerless against the highly trained men. They extracted the heavy ring of keys, the shiny platinum credit cards, and the sleek corporate smartphone, placing them neatly onto the mahogany table. Escort the former director off the premises, Jackson ordered, nodding to the second guard, and ensure his face is permanently added to the strict do not enter registry for every single building we manage in this city. The security guards grabbed Marcus by the arms, lifting him entirely off his feet. They dragged him backward toward the heavy oak doors. He thrashed wildly, his expensive Italian leather shoes scraping harshly against the floor. "Naomi!" He screamed, his voice echoing through the long hallway outside. "Naomi, you need me. You are nothing without me." I stood perfectly still, watching the heavy doors swing shut behind him. But the sound of his pathetic screaming did not stop. It echoed loudly down the hallway and into the crowded main lobby of the luxury hotel. Dozens of wealthy guests and staff members stopped to watch in absolute shock as the former titan of finance was physically dragged out the front glass doors, crying and kicking like a petulant toddler. The security guards literally tossed him onto the hot concrete sidewalk. He landed hard, scraping his hands and tearing the knees of his expensive tailored suit. He sat there on the dirty pavement, staring up at the massive glass building he used to rule. He had no money, no phone, no car, and no family. He was completely destroyed. Marcus sat on the dirty concrete sidewalk for nearly 20 minutes before he finally found the courage to ask a passing stranger to borrow their cell phone. He dialed his mother with violently shaking hands, desperately needing a place to stay, and a friendly voice to comfort his bruised ego. But the moment the call connected, Marcus did not even get a chance to say hello. Shirley answered the phone in a state of absolute breathless hysteria. "Marcus, is that you?" Shirley screamed into the receiver, her voice shrill and entirely panicked. "Thank God you are calling from a different number. You need to get over here right this very second. There are two armed county sheriffs standing right in the middle of my living room, and they are threatening to throw all of my expensive furniture out onto the front lawn." Marcus felt a fresh wave of ice-cold terror wash over his entire body. "Mom, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why are the police at your house?" "They are holding an official eviction notice, Marcus," she sobbed loudly. "They are claiming that my luxury townhouse does not actually belong to me. They said the property is just a high-end corporate rental, and the commercial lease was abruptly terminated an hour ago. Tell them they are making a massive mistake, Marcus. Tell them you bought this beautiful house for me in cash 3 years ago, just like you proudly promised." A sickening silence fell over the phone line. Marcus closed his eyes tightly, a fresh tear slipping down his cheek. He had never actually purchased the expensive property. He had desperately wanted to play the role of the generous, wealthy son, but he did not have the liquid cash to buy $1 million townhouse outright. Instead, he had quietly leased the property, using the company name, and paid the exorbitant monthly rent, using corporate funds. He had completely lied to his mother, his family, and all of his friends to inflate his massive ego. "Mom, I did not buy the house," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the busy downtown traffic. "It is a corporate lease. I put it under the company name to secure a better tax write-off." "You did what?" Shirley shrieked, her voice cracking with absolute betrayal. "You told the entire family you bought this property. You let me brag to all of my friends at the church about my successful, generous son. And now you are telling me I am just a temporary tenant. Naomi is the new chief executive officer now." Marcus choked out, fighting back another pathetic sob. "She officially controls all of the corporate assets. If she terminated the commercial lease, there is absolutely nothing I can do to stop the eviction. I do not have any money, Mom. They took everything from me." Shirley dropped the phone from her ear, her entire world violently spinning out of control. The line went completely dead, leaving Marcus sitting alone on the curb. Back at the luxury townhouse, Shirley stared at the two imposing county sheriffs standing in her grand foyer. The lead sheriff, a tall man with a stern expression, tapped his clipboard impatiently. "You have exactly 1 hour to vacate these premises, ma'am," the sheriff stated firmly. "If you are not completely off the property by then, we will physically escort you out and permanently lock the doors." Shirley looked around the beautifully decorated living room she had proudly called her own for 3 years. Panic set in. She had no moving boxes. In her arrogant rush to kick me out of my own home earlier that morning, she had eagerly left all of her flattened cardboard boxes sitting right on my kitchen floor. She had absolutely nothing to pack her belongings into. Frantic and completely humiliated, Shirley sprinted into her immaculate kitchen and ripped open the cabinet doors. The only things she could find were heavy-duty black plastic garbage bags. She grabbed a handful of the cheap plastic bags and ran upstairs to her massive walk-in closet. Tears of pure shame poured down her wrinkled face as she began frantically stuffing her expensive designer dresses, her luxury shoes, and her valuable jewelry into the ugly black trash bags. She looked like a common thief frantically burglarizing her own home. The grand matriarch, who had spent the last decade looking down her nose at everyone else, was now reduced to hauling black garbage bags down the stairs under the watchful eyes of the local police. She dragged the heavy plastic bags out the front door and dumped them onto the pristine suburban sidewalk. Her wealthy neighbors peered out from behind their expensive curtains, watching the dramatic spectacle unfold with eager judgment. Shirley sat on a stuffed garbage bag in the afternoon sun, weeping uncontrollably. She had no home, no money, and a son who was a proven fraud. While Shirley was busy sobbing over her plastic garbage bags, my afternoon remained wonderfully peaceful. I was sitting in my sunlit living room going over corporate transition documents with my legal team. The large house was blissfully quiet and felt incredibly safe. But exactly at 4 o'clock, the heavy brass knocker on my front door began slamming repeatedly. The frantic banging echoed through the quiet foyer, completely disrupting my peace. I excused myself from the call, set my tablet down, and walked toward the entrance. I already knew exactly who was standing on my front porch. I pulled the heavy oak door open. Valerie, my usually immaculate and incredibly arrogant sister-in-law, was practically collapsing against the doorframe. Her expensive mascara was running in thick black streaks down her cheeks. Her hair, which was usually styled to absolute perfection, hung in messy clumps around her face. The moment she saw me, she let out a loud, dramatic wail and literally dropped to her knees right on my welcome mat. "Naomi, please, you have to help me," Valerie sobbed, grabbing desperately at the hem of my pants. "You have to call the federal investigators and tell them you made a mistake. Todd was just formally indicted for massive wire fraud, and the federal government immediately froze all of our personal bank accounts. We are completely bankrupt, Naomi. They are threatening to take our house, our cars, and put Todd in federal prison for 20 years. I took a deliberate step backward, forcing her to release her desperate grip on my clothes. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely no pity. Just 24 hours ago, she had confidently marched into my kitchen, holding empty moving boxes, demanding I pack up and leave so her brother could move his young mistress into my home. Now she was groveling, begging for mercy. "I am not calling anyone Valerie," I replied, my voice completely flat. "I did not make a mistake. Your husband stole millions of dollars to artificially inflate a fake corporate empire. The federal government has the concrete proof, and they do not drop felony charges just because a crying wife asks nicely." "But we are family, Naomi," Valerie pleaded, looking up at me with terrified eyes. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest. "We are sisters. We have known each other for 15 years. You cannot just stand by and watch my entire family get completely destroyed. Please, Naomi, just give us a loan. A few $100,000 so we can hire a decent criminal defense attorney. You have millions now. You will not even miss the money. Sisterhood means sticking together during the hard times." I let out a short, bitter laugh that echoed off the brick exterior. The sheer audacity of her request was almost physically sickening. "Family loyalty." I repeated the words, tasting like poison in my mouth. "Sisterhood. You want to talk about sisterhood now? Valerie, where was this beautiful sisterhood for the past 15 years? Valerie froze, her sobbing suddenly hitching in her throat. "Let me refresh your memory since you seem to have convenient amnesia," I continued, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "For 15 long years, you and your arrogant husband treated me like absolute garbage. Todd constantly talked down to me using his slick corporate jargon. treating me like I was a completely uneducated woman who could not comprehend basic math. And you, Valerie, you sat at every single Thanksgiving dinner, making snide classist remarks about my background. You happily let Todd call me an angry charity case, who was just lucky to be married into your supposedly wealthy and highly educated family. Just yesterday morning, Todd stood in my kitchen and told me not to act like a stereotypical uneducated black woman from the television. I reminded her, my eyes locking onto hers with burning intensity. He thought his white corporate privilege made him completely untouchable. He thought he could steal from my company and insult my intelligence without ever facing a single consequence. Well, Valerie, now he gets to face the ultimate consequence. Please, Naomi, do not do this, Valerie begged, fresh tears pouring down her ruined face. We will lose absolutely everything we have ever worked for in our lives. You and your husband Todd made your choices, I said very coldly, stepping back inside my beautiful house. I suggest you go home and let your incredibly smart white husband figure out his own legal defense. Do not ever knock on my front door again. Without waiting for her pathetic reply, I reached out and pushed the heavy, solid oak door forward. The latch clicked shut with a loud, solid thud, leaving her entirely alone, crying on my quiet suburban front porch forever. The weekend passed with a sense of quiet empowerment, until Sunday morning arrived. I woke up early and dressed in a simple floral dress, preparing to attend the Sunday service at the community church our family had attended for a decade. It was a traditional congregation deeply rooted in old-fashioned family values and strict biblical principles. I knew going to church would be risky, but I refused to hide in my house like a guilty criminal. I walked into the grand sanctuary, taking my usual seat in the third pew, near the center aisle. The choir was singing a beautiful hymn, and the atmosphere felt peaceful, until I saw them walking down the aisle. Marcus and his mother Shirley marched into the sanctuary looking like they had survived a natural disaster. Marcus was wearing a rumpled suit. Shirley was dressed entirely in black, clutching a worn leather Bible, looking like a grieving widow. They purposefully walked past several empty rows and squeezed into the pew directly across the aisle from me. Marcus glared at me with bloodshot eyes, but I simply faced forward, focusing entirely on the choir, refusing to give them the reaction they desperately wanted. When the opening hymns finally concluded, Pastor Williams stepped up to the wooden pulpit, adjusting his microphone. He welcomed the congregation and asked if anyone had a special prayer request or a testimony to share. Before the pastor could even finish his sentence, Marcus abruptly stood up from his seat. He stepped out into the wide center aisle, raising his hand high in the air. Shirley immediately stood up right beside him, grabbing his arm and burying her face in his shoulder, letting out a loud, dramatic sob that echoed through the silent sanctuary. Pastor Williams, please, I need to speak to my church family, Marcus called out, his voice trembling with manufactured grief. My family is under a massive spiritual attack, and we desperately need the prayers of this congregation. Pastor Williams, looking slightly confused but sympathetic, gestured for Marcus to go ahead. The entire congregation turned their heads, staring eagerly at the unfolding drama. Brothers and sisters, I stand before you today as a broken man, Marcus began, projecting his voice. For 15 years, I worked tirelessly to provide a beautiful life for my wife, Naomi, and our 2 children. I built a highly successful business, pouring my sweat and blood into being a good, strong provider for my household, but the devil has poisoned my wife's heart. She has completely turned her back on her holy vows of marriage and submission. Older women in the congregation shook their heads, whispering quietly among themselves, casting judgmental glances in my direction. Shirley wailed louder, clinging desperately to her son, amplifying the highly theatrical and manipulative performance. She discovered a minor legal loophole in our business contracts. Marcus continued, pointing an accusing finger directly at me. She used her expensive lawyers to illegally steal my entire company right out from under me. She froze every bank account, leaving me with nothing. She evicted my poor elderly mother from her home yesterday, forcing her to pack her belongings into plastic garbage bags and throwing her out onto the street like worthless trash without a single ounce of Christian charity. The congregation gasped, turning their shocked eyes toward me. The traditional church members strongly believed that a good Christian wife should always submit to her husband, leadership no matter what. Marcus was brilliantly playing the victim, weaponizing their deeply ingrained religious beliefs to publicly destroy my character. He knew these people valued the holy image of a submissive, supportive wife above all else. She is trying to destroy a strong black man who only wanted to lead his family. Marcus shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She lacks forgiveness and basic human decency. I made a small mistake in our marriage, and instead of praying with me, she maliciously plotted to ruin my life. We deeply need this church to pray for her dark soul. We need you to help convince her to return the stolen assets. Shirley grabbed the microphone from the closest aisle stand, her face stained with fake tears. Please pray for my daughter-in-law, Shirley begged, looking out at the shocked faces around her. Pray that the good Lord softens her bitter heart. Pray that she stops this wicked crusade against my innocent son. They stood there in the center aisle, soaking up the sympathetic murmurs of the traditional congregation. They honestly believed they had successfully cornered me in a holy sanctuary where I could not fight back. They fully expected the senior church elders to pressure me into submitting to my husband's demands. But they completely forgot that I had already prepared for this exact moment. Pastor Williams gently placed his hand over the microphone. He looked down at Shirley and Marcus. The congregation held their collective breath, expecting the senior pastor to turn his righteous judgment toward me. They expected him to demand that I apologize to my husband and restore his wealth. Instead, Pastor Williams let out a mournful sigh. He reached under the heavy wooden pulpit and pulled out a thick blue folder. I recognized that blue folder immediately. I had personally handed it to him during a private meeting in his church office late Thursday afternoon. Pastor Williams turned the microphone back on. His voice did not carry the warm, sympathetic tone Marcus had hoped for. It was incredibly stern and filled with righteous disappointment. Marcus, the pastor, began looking directly at the man. You speak eloquently about spiritual attacks and the sacred duties of a Christian household. You stand in this holy sanctuary asking for our prayers and our support. But the Lord demands absolute truth in his house, and the truth you have brought here today is nothing but wicked lies. Marcus faltered, taking a nervous step backward. Pastor, what do you mean? He stammered, his confident theatrical facade instantly cracking. I am telling you the absolute truth. She stole everything from me. Pastor Williams opened the blue folder, resting it on the wooden podium. For the past 4 years, this church trusted you as our primary financial advisor, Marcus. We trusted you with the sacred tithes and offerings of this congregation. Specifically, we trusted you to manage the youth center building fund. That money was painstakingly raised by the elderly women baking pies, by the children saving their pennies, and by hardworking families giving what little they had so our community could have a safe place for our youth. The sanctuary became so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Shirley slowly lowered the microphone, her fake tears instantly drying up as a new, genuine terror washed over her. According to the certified bank records I hold in my hands, Pastor Williams continued, his voice echoing with absolute authority. You did not protect those sacred funds, Marcus. Over the last 18 months, you systematically skimmed over $100,000 from the youth building fund. You funneled that stolen money through fake vendor accounts to pay for expensive dinners, luxury hotel rooms, and designer gifts for a young woman who is not your wife. Loud gasps erupted from every corner of the church. The older women who had just been whispering harsh judgments about me now stared at Marcus in absolute horror. Stealing from a church, stealing from innocent children was considered the ultimate unforgivable sin in this close-knit community. That is a complete lie, Marcus shouted, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She fabricated those documents, Pastor. She is trying to frame me. The bank records were already verified by the Church Independent Accounting Board yesterday morning, Pastor Williams countered sharply. Your signature is on every single fraudulent wire transfer, Marcus. But the true measure of a person's heart is not just found in how they fall, but in how others quietly step up to repair the terrible damage. Pastor Williams looked up from the blue folder and met my eyes. His expression softened with deep respect. Sister Naomi came to my office on Thursday. She did not come to gossip or boast. She came to confess your terrible sins to the church elders in private, trying to spare this congregation the public scandal you just forced upon us. And then, without asking for a word of recognition, she wrote a personal check to cover the $100,000 you stole. She fully restored the youth building fund out of her own pocket, so the children of this community would not have to suffer for your selfish greed. You came into this sanctuary today, trying to manipulate our faith and destroy the reputation of a righteous woman, Pastor Williams declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality. You have defiled this altar with your arrogance and your theft. Marcus Shirley, you are no longer welcome in this congregation. I must ask you to leave the sanctuary immediately, and do not ever return. Marcus stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently. He looked around the large room pleading for a single friendly face, but the congregation responded with brutal unified silence. Entire rows of people turned their backs to the center aisle, refusing to even look at him. The community he had relied on to save him had rejected him. Shaking with pure humiliation, Marcus grabbed his mother by the arm. Together they walked slowly down the long aisle toward the exit, their heads hung in absolute disgrace. While Marcus was losing the last shred of his social standing inside that church, Chloe was experiencing her own personal nightmare across town. She was sitting on a hard metal bench inside a freezing holding cell at the county detention center. Her expensive designer white dress was wrinkled and stained. Her perfect makeup had completely washed away, leaving her face pale and exhausted. The glamorous illusion of being a wealthy corporate wife had violently shattered, leaving her facing the incredibly harsh reality of the criminal justice system. She had spent the entire weekend locked in that miserable cell, desperately waiting for Marcus to post her bail. She honestly believed he would march into the police station with his high-priced lawyers and rescue her like a wealthy knight in shining armor. But Marcus never came. He never even answered his phone. On Monday morning, the heavy steel door of the interrogation room swung open. Special Agent Thomas walked in carrying a thick manila folder. He sat down across the metal table from Chloe and placed the folder down with a heavy thud. He did not offer her any warm greetings or sympathetic smiles. He opened the file and began listing the severe charges against her: grand larceny, possession of stolen property, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Agent Thomas looked directly into her terrified eyes and calmly explained that she was facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in a federal women prison. Chloe started sobbing uncontrollably, begging for mercy and claiming she was just an innocent victim manipulated by an older, wealthy man. Agent Thomas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the cold metal table. He told Chloe that the federal government had absolutely no interest in destroying the life of a young assistant if they could catch the real mastermind behind the massive corporate fraud. He offered her a very clear and brutal choice. She could either remain loyal to a man who had completely abandoned her and spend the next decade of her life behind bars, or she could accept a full immunity plea deal right now. The only condition for the plea deal was her total and unconditional cooperation in the federal case against Marcus and Todd. Chloe did not even hesitate for a single second. Her loyalty to Marcus was entirely transactional, built exclusively on expensive dinners, luxury cars, and diamond necklaces. Now that the money was completely gone, her supposed deep love for him evaporated instantly. She eagerly grabbed a pen and signed the federal immunity agreement. To save herself from prison, she threw Marcus entirely under the bus. She wiped her tears and began telling Agent Thomas absolutely everything she knew about his illegal business operations. She revealed that Marcus kept 2 secret burner phones hidden inside a false bottom drawer in his private office desk. More importantly, Chloe disclosed the exact location of his physical offshore ledgers. Marcus had rented a private safe deposit box under her name at a local downtown bank, using her identity to hide the physical evidence of his stolen wealth. She eagerly handed over the small brass key to the safe deposit box, giving the federal agents direct access to the most damning evidence of his massive criminal conspiracy. Later that same afternoon, Marcus was sitting alone on the edge of a stained mattress inside a cheap roadside motel room. It was the only place he could afford with the few crumpled bills he had left in his wallet. A loud, aggressive knock on the flimsy motel door made him jump. He slowly walked over and pulled the door open, expecting to see the angry motel manager. Instead, he found two serious men in dark suits standing on the exterior walkway. One of the men held up a federal badge, while the other handed Marcus a thick, sealed, legal envelope. "You have been officially served, Marcus," the federal agent stated coldly. "That is a federal subpoena demanding your immediate appearance in court for a grand jury indictment. We have fully recovered your hidden burner phones and the offshore ledgers from the safe deposit box. Your former assistant, Chloe, is fully cooperating with our ongoing investigation as a star witness for the prosecution. Have a nice day, sir." The two federal agents turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the doorway. He looked down at the heavy federal subpoena in his trembling hands. His wife had legally outsmarted him. His business partners had fired him. His church had banished him, and his young mistress had completely betrayed him to save her own skin. He had absolutely nowhere left to run. 3 weeks after that pathetic scene at the roadside motel, I sat comfortably inside a sterile, brightly lit conference room at my attorney office. The thick mahogany table in front of me was covered in neatly organized legal folders. Eleanor sat to my right, adjusting her expensive glasses and reviewing the final settlement terms. We were waiting for the official divorce deposition to begin. The heavy glass door clicked open and Marcus slowly walked into the room. He was entirely alone. He could not afford to hire a legal representative, so he was forced to represent himself in one of the most complex corporate divorce settlements in state history. I almost did not recognize the man pulling out the chair across from me. He looked as though he had aged 10 years in just 21 days. He was wearing the exact same tailored suit he had worn on the day security dragged him out of his office building, but now the fabric was visibly worn, the knees were slightly torn, and the collar was horribly wrinkled. His usually immaculate haircut was overgrown and messy. The arrogant posture that had defined his entire personality was completely gone, replaced by a heavy, pathetic slouch. He looked utterly defeated. The court reporter sitting at the end of the table instructed Marcus to state his name for the official record. He mumbled his response, his voice barely above a raspy whisper. Eleanor immediately opened the proceedings, outlining the massive mountain of debt and legal liabilities Marcus had accumulated. But Marcus was not listening to the legal jargon. His bloodshot eyes were fixed entirely on me. "Naomi," he interrupted, completely ignoring Eleanor's sharp reprimand about proper deposition protocol. "Naomi, please just look at me." I looked up from my notepad, meeting his desperate gaze with absolute cold indifference. "I am so incredibly sorry." Naomi Marcus choked out, genuine tears finally spilling over his dark eyelashes and running down his sunken cheeks. I was completely out of my mind. I was going through a terrible midlife crisis, and I let my massive ego blind me to what truly mattered. Chloe brainwashed me. She constantly whispered toxic lies into my ear, making me believe I needed a younger woman to validate my success. But she meant absolutely nothing to me. "You are the only woman I have ever truly loved." He leaned forward, resting his trembling hands on the mahogany table. "I have lost my company, my friends, and my reputation." Marcus sobbed, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "But none of that matters. The only thing I actually care about losing is you and the kids. Please, Naomi, I am begging you on my hands and knees. Call off this divorce. Let me come home. I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you." His tears were entirely real. He was genuinely terrified of the dark, miserable future waiting for him. But his desperate apology meant absolutely nothing to me because I knew it was not rooted in actual remorse. He was only apologizing because he had been completely stripped of his power and cornered by the federal government. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of pity. I simply reached across the table and placed my hand on top of a specific red folder. "You say Chloe brainwashed you into this sudden midlife crisis, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly flat and analytical. "You claim this was just a temporary lapse in judgment caused by a manipulative young assistant." "Yes," Marcus nodded frantically, wiping the tears from his chin. "Exactly. She manipulated my terrible insecurities." I opened the red folder and slid 3 crisp printed documents across the polished table, stopping them right in front of his hands. "Then, please explain these official banking records," Marcus, I instructed coldly. Marcus looked down at the papers, and his breath caught sharply in his throat. "These are legally verified wire transfer receipts I explained for the court reporter to record. They clearly show that you began secretly funneling corporate profits into a hidden offshore account under Chloe's name exactly 2 years ago. Long before you ever publicly announced your little midlife crisis at our anniversary dinner. You spent 24 months meticulously plotting to hide marital assets so you could leave me with absolutely nothing. You were not brainwashed, Marcus. You were extremely calculating, incredibly selfish, and ultimately very stupid." Marcus stared at the dates on the transfer receipts, the undeniable proof of his long-term premeditated betrayal. The pathetic tears drying instantly on his face. He realized he had absolutely no more pathetic lies left to tell anyone else in this room today. 2 weeks later, we found ourselves sitting inside a sterile family courtroom. Marcus had officially abandoned his attempt to secure any of my corporate assets. The federal government had already seized whatever hidden funds he had left. But a desperate man is a dangerous man. Since he was facing massive debt and potential prison time, he decided to play his absolute final card. He filed an emergency motion requesting full primary physical custody of our 2 teenage children. His motivation was incredibly transparent. He did not actually want to raise Malik and Tiana. He simply wanted to force me to pay him thousands of dollars a month in mandatory child support so he could afford to rent a decent apartment and hire a cheap criminal defense lawyer. Marcus stood before the family court judge, wearing his wrinkled suit. He launched into a highly rehearsed speech about how much he loved his children. He tried to paint me as a cold, calculating corporate executive who was far too busy managing my newly reclaimed financial empire to properly care for a family. He claimed he was the nurturing parent who could provide a stable, loving environment if the court would just grant him the appropriate financial support from my vast resources. The judge, a stern older woman, listened quietly before announcing that she wanted to hear directly from the children. Because of their ages, Malik and Tiana were legally allowed to provide official statements regarding their own living preferences. The heavy wooden doors opened, and my 2 brave children walked into the courtroom. They sat down at the witness table, looking directly at the judge. Marcus offered them a warm, pathetic smile, but they completely ignored him. The judge asked Malik to speak first. My 14-year-old son sat perfectly straight, his broad shoulders squared. He did not look like a scared child trapped in a bitter divorce. He looked like a young man ready to defend his peace. "My father does not want custody of us," Malik stated, his voice steady and projecting clearly across the silent courtroom. "He only wants a monthly paycheck. For my entire life, he has only ever used my sister and me as convenient props to make himself look like a successful family man. He only cared about his expensive cars, his custom suits, and his public image. On the night of their anniversary, he stood up in a crowded restaurant and abandoned us for his young assistant. He told my mother she was a worthless leech right in front of our faces. He did not care about providing a stable environment then, and he does not care about it now. He just wants to use us to pay his massive debts." Marcus' face flushed dark red. "Malik, please," he whispered loudly, leaning toward the witness table. Do not say these things. You know I love you both. Malik slowly turned his head and looked directly at his father. You love yourself. Malik replied coldly. You do not even know who we are. The judge scribbled a long note on her legal pad before turning her attention to Tiana. My 12-year-old daughter took a deep breath. She looked much older than her age, carrying a quiet, heavy wisdom. When my father got locked out of his bank accounts, he bought his mistress a $50,000 diamond necklace using stolen money. Tiana explained, her voice echoing softly. He let that woman come to my middle school in a luxury sports car to loudly humiliate my mother in front of all my friends. He tried to make us feel small so he could feel big. A real father protects his children. He does not use stolen money to send his young girlfriend to bully them. Tiana paused, her dark eyes locking onto Marcus' terrified face. I do not want to live with him, Tiana concluded with absolute finality. In fact, when this divorce is finalized, I want to legally change my name. I am incredibly embarrassed to share his last name. I want to be a Wilson just like my mother. The courtroom fell into a deafening silence. Marcus staggered backward, gripping the edge of his wooden table to keep from collapsing. He had spent his entire adult life desperately chasing wealth status and the admiration of total strangers. But hearing his own daughter explicitly state that she was ashamed to carry his name broke something deep inside of him. The federal indictments, the corporate humiliation, and the massive financial ruin were all devastating blows. But this was the ultimate fatal strike. The cold, brutal reality finally crashed down upon him. He had permanently lost the only true legacy that ever actually mattered. His children wanted nothing to do with him ever again. That custody hearing completely broke whatever fighting spirit Marcus had left. 3 days later, we returned to the exact same courthouse to finalize the financial settlement. The atmosphere inside the judge's chambers was suffocatingly formal. Eleanor sat to my right, organizing the final stacks of heavy legal paperwork, while Marcus sat across the wooden table, staring blankly at the dark mahogany grain. He did not bring up the children again. He did not look at me. He sat there looking like an empty shell of a human being, waiting for the final executioner to drop the heavy axe. Judge Harrison, a no-nonsense magistrate who had zero tolerance for corporate white-collar criminals, took her seat at the head of the table. She adjusted her reading glasses and opened the massive divorce file. Let us conclude this incredibly messy proceeding, the judge announced, her voice echoing sharply in the quiet room. Given the extensive concrete evidence of premeditated financial fraud, embezzlement, and severe breach of fiduciary duty, the court finds absolutely no grounds for an equal division of marital assets. Marcus flinched slightly, but kept his head bowed. Eleanor slid the very first stack of papers toward the center of the table. The judge reviewed the documents and nodded firmly. Because Mr. Wilson knowingly utilized forged corporate tax returns and fraudulent collateral to secure his recent high-interest personal loans, the court is officially severing Mrs. Wilson from any and all liability regarding those specific debts, the judge stated cleanly. You took out those predatory loans under false pretenses, Marcus. Therefore, the entire financial burden falls exclusively on your shoulders. Marcus finally looked up, his dark eyes wide with renewed panic. But, Your Honor, he whispered, his voice cracking. Those loans have a 40% interest rate. With the compound penalties and the default fees, the total debt is already over $2.5 million. I do not have a job. I do not have a car. How am I supposed to pay back $2.5 million? That is an issue you will have to discuss with your creditors and your bankruptcy attorney, Marcus. The judge replied without a single ounce of true sympathy. You engaged in highly illegal financial maneuvers to fund an illicit lifestyle and impress your young mistress. The court will not force your innocent wife to subsidize your criminal negligence. Furthermore, all equity previously held in the financial consulting firm has been legally and permanently restored to Naomi. The judge picked up your heavy black pen and signed the bottom of the first decree. You are leaving this 15-year marriage with exactly $0 in liquid assets, 0 real estate properties, and 0 corporate equity. the judge concluded brutally. You are, however, leaving with $2.5 million in toxic personal debt and pending severe federal criminal indictments. Eleanor then pushed the final and most important document across the smooth table. It was a thick packet with a bright red border. Your Honor, my client is officially requesting a permanent financial restraining order against the respondent, Eleanor stated professionally. Given his proven history of identity theft, forgery, and wire fraud, we require absolute legal protection. The judge reviewed the red-bordered document and immediately signed it. Granted, the judge declared. Marcus, you are hereby permanently barred from contacting Naomi, her children, her business associates, or any of her financial institutions. You are strictly forbidden from coming within 500 feet of her primary residence, her commercial properties, or her corporate headquarters. If you attempt to access a single one of her bank accounts or use her name to secure a line of credit, you will be arrested for violating a direct judicial order. The judge pushed the final stack of settlement papers toward Marcus. Sign them, the judge ordered. Marcus picked up the plastic pen provided by the court. His hand was shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen straight. He looked at the signature line, realizing that signing this document was the absolute end of his life as he knew it. He would walk out of this courthouse as a completely ruined, deeply indebted, and thoroughly disgraced man. He slowly lowered the pen and signed his name. The ink scratched harshly against the paper. The sound was incredibly satisfying. It was the sound of my absolute freedom. Eleanor quickly collected the signed documents, securing them inside her leather briefcase. I slowly stood up from the heavy wooden chair, smoothing down my elegant skirt. I did not say goodbye to him. I did not offer him any parting words of wisdom or closure. I simply turned around and walked out of the cold judge's chambers, leaving him drowning in his own $2.5 million ocean of debt. The months following that final signature were a masterclass in absolute karma. While my empire flourished without the dead weight of a parasitic husband, the people who had conspired to destroy me were forced to swallow the bitter poison of their own extreme arrogance. The justice system moved swiftly and without mercy. Todd was the very first to fall. The arrogant stockbroker, who loved to patronize me about complex financial concepts, suddenly found himself completely unable to talk his way out of a federal indictment. The federal judge did not find his slick corporate charm amusing in the slightest. Because of the overwhelming mountain of digital evidence I had handed directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission, Todd was found guilty on multiple counts of severe wire fraud and the illegal misappropriation of elderly client retirement funds. He wept openly in the courtroom when the judge banged the heavy wooden gavel, sentencing him to 5 hard years in a federal penitentiary. The man who used to wear custom Italian suits and brag about his massive stock portfolios was now wearing a generic orange jumpsuit, stripped of his broker license, his wealth, and his precious freedom. With Todd locked away, and their bank accounts entirely seized by the federal government, Valerie experienced a terrifying freefall from her comfortable high society pedestal. The woman who had aggressively mocked my lack of a traditional career and laughed at my reliable family minivan was suddenly faced with the brutal reality of having zero marketable skills. Desperate to survive, she was forced to take a grueling minimum-wage retail job at a discount clothing store. The former golden child of the family now spent 8 hours a day on her swollen feet, folding cheap t-shirts and being verbally abused by angry bargain shoppers who demanded to speak to her manager. Valerie could not afford her luxury lifestyle anymore. She was evicted from her massive estate and had absolutely no choice but to move in with her equally destitute mother. Shirley and Valerie were forced to sign a lease for a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The thin walls offered no privacy, and the cheap linoleum floors were constantly crawling with cockroaches. The two women who had spent over a decade maliciously judging everyone else now spent their miserable evenings sitting on a stained thrift store couch, bitterly blaming each other for their spectacular downfall. Their grand sisterhood had completely dissolved into a toxic nightmare of poverty and endless complaining. But the most satisfying and poetic justice was entirely reserved for Marcus. The man who had proudly called himself a visionary chief executive officer was now a convicted felon with $2.5 million in predatory debt anchored permanently to his neck. Because his face had been plastered across the local news during the federal embezzlement scandal, absolutely no reputable financial firm in the entire country would ever hire him. His elite corporate network had blacklisted him completely, leaving him entirely radioactive in the business world. Driven by the desperate need to pay for his cheap meals and avoid living on the actual streets, Marcus was forced to accept the only job that would hire a disgraced fraudster. He became a low-level outbound telemarketer, working in a depressing windowless call center. The man who used to command luxurious executive boardrooms now sat in a tiny gray cubicle, wearing a cheap plastic headset. For 10 agonizing hours a day, he cold-called strangers, trying to sell them worthless extended auto warranties. He spent his entire shift reading from a laminated script, getting loudly cursed at, insulted, and abruptly hung up on by angry people who had absolutely no idea they were screaming at a former multimillionaire. When his miserable shift finally ended, Marcus did not step into a sleek silver Porsche Panamera. He slowly walked to the corner and waited in the freezing rain for the city bus. He rode the crowded, noisy public transit for an hour, staring blankly out the smudged window until he reached his new home. It was a single depressing rented room in a rundown boarding house smelling strongly of bleach and old cigarettes. There was a narrow, squeaky bed, a tiny cloudy mirror, and a single bare light bulb hanging from the cracked ceiling. He would sit on the edge of the cheap mattress staring at the peeling wallpaper, utterly crushed by the suffocating weight of his own creation. He had traded a beautiful, loyal family, a massive financial empire, and a life of absolute luxury for a cheap thrill and an inflated ego. He had tried to break me so he could build his own twisted kingdom. But in the end, I kept the castle, and he was left with exactly what he truly deserved: absolutely nothing. 6 months after the judge signed that final decree, my life looked completely different. The dark, heavy cloud that had hung over my family for 15 years was entirely gone, replaced by brilliant, blinding sunshine. It was a warm, beautiful Saturday afternoon, and I was hosting a massive, elegant cookout on the sprawling, pristine lawns of my newly renovated estate. I had poured millions of dollars into upgrading the property, transforming it into a modern sanctuary of peace and ultimate luxury. The massive custom-built outdoor kitchen was fully staffed with private chefs grilling expensive cuts of Wagyu beef and fresh lobster tails. A live jazz band played smoothly on the newly constructed wooden deck, filling the crisp air with joyful, soulful music. I walked across the manicured green grass, holding a crystal flute filled with imported vintage champagne. Everywhere I looked, I saw genuine, brilliant smiles. The guest list for this celebration was highly exclusive. There were no toxic mother-in-laws, no arrogant stockbrokers, and no fake corporate friends looking for a quick handout. The people gathered on my lawn today were my true, authentic village. My supportive extended family members who had always believed in my vision were laughing loudly by the sparkling blue swimming pool. My fiercely loyal business partners, including Eleanor and Robert, who had proven their worth during the hostile corporate takeover, were relaxing comfortably under the shaded canvas cabanas. I stopped near the edge of the patio and just watched my children. Malik was standing near the deep end of the pool, surrounded by his teenage friends, holding a plate piled high with barbecue. He had grown another 2 inches, and the heavy protective tension he used to carry in his broad shoulders was completely gone. He was laughing freely, a rich, joyous sound that warmed my entire soul. Tiana was sitting on a plush lounge chair, showing Eleanor a digital portfolio of her recent artwork. My brilliant daughter was absolutely glowing, her confidence fully restored. She was officially Tiana Wilson now, and she wore our family name like a badge of absolute honor. They were safe, they were loved, and they were completely thriving. Eleanor caught my eye and raised her glass in a silent, respectful toast. I smiled warmly and tapped my crystal flute against a silver spoon. The sharp, clear ringing sound cut through the lively chatter, and the smooth jazz music slowly faded to a gentle halt. Dozens of faces turned toward me, their expressions filled with deep admiration and genuine love. I did not need a microphone to command this crowd. Thank you all for being here today, I began, my voice projecting clearly across the beautiful estate. This past year tested my family in ways I never could have imagined. We faced absolute betrayal, massive financial theft, and a hostile attempt to completely erase our hard-earned legacy. But looking out at all of your beautiful faces today, I am reminded that true wealth is not just found in offshore bank accounts or massive corporate stock portfolios. True wealth is found in the unwavering loyalty of the people standing right here on this lawn. Thank you for protecting my peace and supporting my children. Please eat, drink, and celebrate with us. The crowd erupted into loud, joyful applause and cheerful shouts. As the jazz band picked up the tempo once again, I took a slow sip of my cold champagne and let my mind wander into a deep, powerful internal monologue. This beautiful, sprawling estate, the thriving multi-million-dollar financial firm, the laughing children, and the absolute freedom were all mine. I built this empire from the ground up, using my own inheritance, my own sharp intellect, and my own relentless drive. I had allowed a deeply insecure man to stand on my sturdy shoulders and play the role of a king, but I would never make that terrible mistake again. This was about establishing unbreakable generational wealth for Malik and Tiana. It was about securing a rock-solid financial foundation that no fraudulent husband or greedy relative could ever legally touch. But more importantly, this entire journey was a profound testament to the undeniable strength of Black women. We are constantly expected to shrink ourselves to be small, to quietly absorb the heavy disrespect of others, just to keep the peace. We are told to stand faithfully behind deeply flawed men and accept their bare minimum efforts, as if they were grand, ultimate prizes. I had completely shattered that toxic expectation. I had taken my power back with absolute surgical precision. The most valuable lesson I learned through this entire vicious ordeal was incredibly simple but profoundly life-changing. You must never, under any circumstances, negotiate your actual worth with someone who expects a massive discount. Marcus wanted a discount on my loyalty, my money, and my brilliant mind. He wanted luxury at the cheap expense of my dignity. And when I finally refused to lower my price, he completely bankrupted himself trying to afford me. I took one final look around my magnificent estate, breathing in the sweet smell of barbecue and the sound of pure, joyful laughter. The legal battles were officially over. The corporate traitors were completely banished. The toxic family members were facing their own miserable consequences. I raised my crystal glass toward the bright blue sky, offering a silent toast to my own survival. I took another slow, satisfying sip of champagne, and a triumphant, deeply peaceful smile spread across my face. I had finally won. The story of Naomi and Marcus powerfully illustrates the severe danger of shrinking your own potential to protect someone else's fragile ego. For 15 long years, Naomi intentionally dimmed her own light, allowing her financially reckless husband to claim full public credit for a corporate empire she quietly built and funded. The profound lesson here is that minimizing your brilliance to make another person feel significant never breeds genuine respect or loyalty. Instead, it only invites deep entitlement, resentment, and ultimate betrayal. When you constantly provide a discount on your personal boundaries, your intellect, and your financial contributions, toxic individuals will happily exploit that ongoing generosity. Marcus and his enabling family viewed Naomi's quiet, steadfast support not as a monumental gift, but as a glaring weakness to be cruelly leveraged. However, Naomi's triumphant reclamation of her assets and her life demonstrates that true empowerment comes from radically and unapologetically accepting your own value. You are never obligated to finance your own disrespect or negotiate your intrinsic worth with individuals who simply refuse to see it. grounding this narrative in everyday reality. Healthy relationships strictly require mutual respect, unwavering honesty, and equitable effort. They absolutely do not require one highly capable person to perpetually play small, just so the other can feel artificially tall and important. Standing firmly in your factual truth might violently disrupt the comfortable, unearned illusions of those around you. But it is the only viable path to building a life of authentic peace and lasting stability. We must fiercely protect our time, our energy, our resources, and our self-respect from anyone who demands them without offering equal partnership in return. Take a hard, honest look at your own relationships today and boldly reclaim any space where you have been offering your unwavering loyalty at a massive discount.